So Donald Trump has utterly humiliated himself, but that doesn't detract from the fundamentals. The West is over, as we've understood it, as is the linchpin of the West since World War II, which is American hegemony, and European elites are in a total mess. Now, yesterday, Trump did a long, rambling, and if I'm honest, just boring speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. I'm not saying that simply to make hot shots at this far-right authoritarian demagogue, all of that accurate observation rather than insult, because to be frank, sometimes Trump can be kind of funny. I hate admitting it, but it is what it is. It's always been my view that Donald Trump should have been a drag queen rather than a far-right aspiring dictator. He's extremely camp and sometimes just kind of hilarious as a result without detracting from the seriousness of the threat he poses. Now, this particular speech, I'm afraid to say, was not an example of this. It was just a meandering, tedious stream of consciousness. Anyway, here was a salient part.
We never asked for anything. And we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
You know what? I try to avoid getting into the is Trump really with it narrative because often it seems like wishful thinking on the part of liberals who think this is all some passing nightmarish aberration. If only Trump's health collapses, it'll all be over. But just overall, having watched way too much of this speech, not the most compos mentis performance. Caveat, I'm not a doctor. Just an initial point on the substance. He claims that the US never gets anything from NATO. As many of you will be aware, Article 5 of NATO means that if one NATO member state is attacked, that is considered an attack on all NATO members. That has only been invoked once. That is after the September the 11th attacks on the United States. Obviously, New York, Washington, and a plane which was downed or taken down in Pennsylvania a quarter of a century ago. Now, many Europeans have responded to what Trump said here with outrage. I understand that outrage totally fails, by the way, in being taken to its logical conclusion. I'll tell you what I mean, because I'm kind of aggravated by it, actually. Here's an example of that outrage being vocalized or responded to diplomatically by the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte.
There's one thing I heard you say yesterday and today. You were not absolutely sure that the Europeans would come to the rescue of the US if you will be attacked. Let me tell you, they will. And they did in Afghanistan, as you know, for every American who paid the ultimate, for every 2 Americans who paid the ultimate price, there was one soldier from another NATO country who did not come back to his family. From the Netherlands, from Denmark, particularly from other countries. So you can be assured, absolutely, if ever the US will be under attack, your allies will be with you. Absolutely, there's an absolute guarantee. I really want to tell you this because it is important. It pains me if you think it is not. And under your leadership, this alliance is stronger than ever.
And just before I respond to this, listen to what Mark Rutte said a few months ago when he was meeting with Donald Trump.
They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like 2 kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes. Then it's easy to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while, you have to use a certain word.
Yeah, that's right. Mark Rutte called Donald Trump daddy. I'm not here to kink shame. Have some self-respect, man. Trump referred to this nauseating performance yesterday.
Europe, I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me. They called me daddy, right? Last time. Very smart man said, he's our daddy. He's running it. I was like running it. I went from running it to being a terrible human being.
He meant Greenland there. He keeps mixing up Iceland and Greenland. Unless he now has designs on Iceland, you can't rule that out, can you? But yeah, it's absolutely true that in the aftermath of 9/11, Europeans activated Article 5 and then sent a load of their young people to go fight in Afghanistan. Many of them were killed. 457 British soldiers, 159 Canadian soldiers. That's the Canada Trump wants to annex. 90 French soldiers, 62 Germans, 53 Italians. We could go on. This is being presented as a good thing. Saying to Trump, well, actually, we did make a big sacrifice in the United States. We've proven we've made a big sacrifice to the US. Look at all these youngsters we got killed for you. Without talking about all the youngsters we had maimed for you. And that proves we do it all over again. Are you insane? Do you remember how it all panned out in Afghanistan? No? Well, a little précis then. So after the US chiefly funded the Mujahideen to fight the Soviet invasion in the 1980s, which turned out just great, we did indeed end up embroiled in a 2-decade-long occupation of Afghanistan. In that time, the occupying forces committed multiple heinous war crimes, which the pliant Western media decided to cover up. Alas, that may have been kind of successful for their domestic audiences. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, people had a pretty good gist about how the occupiers were behaving, and they became increasingly angry about it. That led large numbers to take up arms and fight with the Taliban insurgency until Western forces were humiliatingly defeated. This was a catastrophe which should never have happened. The lesson there should be, don't offer up your youngsters as cannon fodder for the United States and its disastrous wars. End this ridiculous military alliance. The lesson shouldn't be, oh, look, isn't it great? We spilled all that blood for you in a totally catastrophic war. All these hundreds and, these thousands of young people, Americans and Europeans, who could still be with us, having families, living their lives, murdered. For what? And guess what, Daddy? We do it all over again. Now, before talking about the so-called Greenland deal, I just want to note what Trump said here.
And then after the war, which we won it big. Without us, right now, you'd all be speaking German and a little Japanese, perhaps.
Do you know what's funny? The speech he was doing there was in Switzerland, which was neutral during World War II, and it's actually in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. Now, this obnoxious line is not specific to Trump. I always find it a slightly odd line, as though the worst element of Nazi rule would be we'd be speaking German. I highly doubt that the Nazi occupiers would have abolished the English and the French languages, exterminating Jews and other minorities, stealing our resources, subjecting us to a totalitarian dictatorship. Yeah, I think they'd have done all of that. German as a compulsory first language, don't think it was their priority. Now, this is also historical erasure. The US did not enter World War II because of noble sacrifice. We're going to save the Europeans from this mess they're in. They entered World War II in 1941 because they were attacked by Imperial Japan, the ally, of course, of Nazi Germany. And the country which did the most to defeat the Nazis was the Soviet Union. 27 million Soviet soldiers and civilians slaughtered. And the USSR had absorbed 95% of the military casualties of the three main allies. It was the Red Army which inflicted the most destruction on the Nazi war machine. 4 out of every 5 of the Third Reich's soldiers were killed on the Eastern Front. Now, according to the British historian Max Hastings, the Red Army was the main engine of Nazism's destruction. And he said it was the Western Allies' extreme good fortune that the Russians, and not themselves, paid almost the entire butcher's bill for defeating fascism. Don't let this clown erase history. Now, it's been claimed that a deal has been struck over Greenland, and therefore Trump has abandoned his threat to impose tariffs on European countries like Britain and France. Trump said he had a very productive meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who calls him Daddy, that the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and the entire Arctic region has been agreed. Given Trump was making clear that the annexation of Greenland was a red line, this is humiliating. The other way of putting it, the pushback from Europeans has been weak, but this does show that if you do push back at Trump, you're more likely to stop him. This should have been clear when China was the only country to put up a proper fight when Trump launched his economic war last year. They ended up as the only country not getting screwed over. But it's not clear what the actual deal is, and Greenland was excluded from these talks. It's been said that the compromise deal could mean the US being granted sovereignty over small pockets of Greenland where their bases are located, as well as giving permission to mine for rare minerals without Danish consent. The Greenlandic member of the Danish parliament, Aya Chemnitz, said that NATO has absolutely no mandate to negotiate anything whatsoever on behalf of Greenland over our heads, adding, and the idea that NATO should have any say at all over our country and our mineral resources is completely absurd. Trump also said yesterday, all we're asking for is to get Greenland, including right, title, and ownership, because you need the ownership to defend it. You can't defend it on a lease. he clearly hasn't given up his ambition to invade and annex Greenland. There's also Donald Trump's so-called Board of Peace, which was originally understood as an occupying force in Gaza, but it's clearly intended to be so much more than that. Trump will act as emperor with a right to veto all decisions. The countries were offered a permanent place if they give $1 billion, which he would have control over. Not a single Palestinian sits on the board, but invitees include Tony Blair, the war criminal despised across the Middle East for the illegal, murderous invasion of Iraq, an Israeli billionaire, property developers like Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who once boasted of the very valuable potential of Gaza's waterfront property. Trump's clearly still obviously committed to the vision he set out in his sick AI-generated video of Gaza last year. Get rid of Gaza's Palestinian population, turn it into a luxury resort for the rich. But the Board of Peace, so-called, very Orwellian, clearly intends to be some sort of replacement for the United Nations. Now, the only EU member to join is Hungary's far-right autocratic leader, Viktor Orban, another humiliation for Trump. He's also invited the likes of Vladimir Putin. Here's the very wise assessment of Jeremy Corbyn.
Should our Prime Minister sit on a board with Vladimir Putin, with whom we are effectively at war?
No, he should not be on the board, and the board should not be there either. The people of Palestine deserve better than this gang of rogues getting together to once again reoccupy Gaza. What has happened to our belief that genocide should not be rewarded and that Palestinian people should be allowed to live in peace, not under occupation?
Gang of rogues, indeed. Where does this leave us? Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is a symptom and an accelerant of Western decline. He's there because in the 21st century, after the hubris of the Cold War, in terms of we the end of history, we can do what we like, our economic system's perfect, we're militarily invincible, morally, we're supreme. America got strategically defeated in Afghanistan, Iraq, obviously the calamity of Libya. Its economic system went into meltdown with financial crash. The combination of sense of military humiliation and economic stagnation is what Trump is fed on. He's fed off that. But he's an accelerant because what's he achieving here? I mean, American power is declining. I mean, you know, the likes of Canada is gone, well, we're off to do these deals with China. China's influence and position is growing because of what he's doing. And his power in Europe is waning. The American power in Europe is waning because European elites are going, well, we can't rely on the US. So this, you know, the so-called Western alliance is dead in practice. There's no coming back from Trump's push to steal the land of a military ally. US power is now more detested by Europeans than it's ever been. No one can look at the US as somehow reliable, whatever happens now. Here's the real truth. American hegemony has always been based on brutal subjugation. For decades, it helped overthrow elected governments from Latin America to Iran to impose murderous regimes which served its interests. Its bloody wars ranged from Vietnam to Iraq. And it was under oh-so-cuddly Democratic President Joe Biden that the US armed and facilitated Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people. Donald Trump merely continued that. What Europeans are upset about is the US giving them the tiniest slither of the treatment that the global South has long suffered. They weren't furious when the US was on the murderous rampage on other continents. They often went along with it. It's only when they're on the receiving end that they see the problem. Well, look, they get it. Western hegemony's over. But what matters now is what happens next, because it's giving way to murderous chaos and great powers carving out spheres of influence, as well as authoritarianism. Not a world we should be fighting for. We need to talk about how we build a new world order of justice and peace before it's too late. Please like and subscribe and help us take on the pro-imperialist genocidal media. I'm not exaggerating. Sounds like hyperbole. It ain't though, is it? At patreon.com/HUMILIATED, you make all of this possible. I keep saying I'm finishing my book, Fall of the West, which becomes tragically, well, not tragically, I mean, well, we'll talk about that, won't we? It becomes more relevant, The Fall of the West, the book I'm writing, comes out in October. You know, and I'm setting out, you know, in terms of the kind of morbid symptoms of Western decline, but also how we got there. Also the question mark about what happens next, because Western hegemony has been full of hideous, murderous injustices. It doesn't mean we just go, well, you know, it falls. That's great, because what happens next? and the West is falling, and it's falling at a dramatic pace. You know, by the time a book comes out in October, people will be like, "Is that a history book?" Anyway, yeah, share the video, like, subscribe, leave your thoughts and comments. Speak to you in a bit.